Hi everybody, welcome to another episode on Air with Owen. Today I'm delighted to be joined by the fantastic Ray Wright, who's the CRO and founder of ufurnish.com. Ray, good to have you here with us today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Owen. It's a pleasure.
How are you?
I'm really good. Yeah,
Good
I'm
stuff.
going well. The sun is shining and it's Friday. So yeah, things are going very well. Thank you.
Nice, glad to hear it. And like you say, the sun is shining and life is better when that happens.
Absolutely.
And as an Aussie, I'm guessing that's a really important thing for you, is that it's giving you a hint of home.
Yeah, yes and no. Yeah, I mean, when you leave Australia to move to the UK, I don't think you're making that move to chase the sunshine. Let's be honest about it. So I think that was a bit of a given. But having said that, I think that British people are very, very harsh on the weather over here. I don't think it's anywhere near as bad as what the picture is painted. So I'm pretty happy with it, and I enjoy the weather over here.
It's funny, isn't it? Anecdotally, I lived in Australia for 8 years, and before I moved to Sydney, I thought it was sun all the time. Everyone tells you it's sun. It's like, that's all you see, and then you get there and realise, oh, they do have a winter. There's actually cold days, and very, 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 very funny misconception, I think. But nonetheless, look, thanks for joining us today, and we're gonna kick off with a really quick intro, if that's okay. So 2 minutes. Who's Ray? Who's ufurnish.com? Bit about how you got there and where you've been.
Yeah, sure. So who is Ray? So Ray Wright from Melbourne, Australia, moved to the UK in 2009, and co-founder and chief revenue officer at ufurnish.com. So ufurnish.com is a search and discovery website for home furniture and furnishings. Easiest way to frame it for your listeners is it's like Rightmove, but for furniture for the home. So you can search over 100 retailers all on one website, and our job is to help consumers find the perfect products for their home. So that's a bit of background on the business. And then for me, I've been in B2B sales my entire life. And so since I first started in sales, effectively coming out of university back in a long time ago. So I mean, that's really been my career, my pedigree. And even coming into ufurnish.com, although it's a B2C proposition as an end product, it's actually B2C, B2B as well, because our customers are actually the furniture retailers that we partner with. They're the ones that consume our product. They're the ones that we monetize. So effectively, I'm still carrying on in my B2B guise, although it's a B2C end product.
Interesting, very interesting. And really quick question on that. So you stepped into a market that's not just B2B, but it's got a B2C element as well. Really quickly, how much difference have you seen in that? I guess you've had to go through a bit of a learning journey there as well.
Definitely. Yeah, 100%. I mean, I never worked in retail, for example, and your buyer is very different. So, prior to this, I was working at a company called Lead Forensics, and I'm sure many of your listeners would have come across in their journeys. And, that was very much a B2B play where you're speaking to B2B decision makers. Whereas when you're stepping into, this space of furniture retail, your buyer profile is very, very different in terms of the way they approach their job, the way that they think, the way that they operate, and the outputs that you're also delivering for them as well. So for me, there was definitely a learning journey of understanding what that looks like for them, what their world looks like, and also understanding the semantics of how you actually communicate with these people. Yeah. And that for me was one of the biggest changes or shifts that I've had to make or adapt to coming out of previous roles into running my own business.
Yeah, interesting. And just to clear up, our topic today is building repeatable, scalable B2B models of revenue growth, which is something that you've done and done well. You've got a lot of learnings from. We're going to try and get as many of those learnings out for our audience today. Ufurnish and leadforensics.com, ufurnish.com and Lead Forensics, how much of a difference are there in terms of the way that you've scaled the revenue model? Have you used the same sort of processes, or are there big differences?
That's a very good question. They're very different in terms of the value proposition and therefore what the profile of the customer looks like and the way that they consume. But essentially, I've used the same methodology around scaling them, particularly when it comes to opening up opportunities and the way that you go about opening up opportunities. So, I mean, in many ways, I'm quite fortunate to have spent, 6 years at Lead Forensics and worked with some amazing people and understanding, the key sort of tactics into how you do that. So I've taken that into youfurnish.com, but definitely, with Lead Forensics, it was all about moving licenses. So it was, this is the proposition, this is how it works, and you're trying to move licenses and you're trying to get people to upsell along the way. Whereas with youfurnish.com, it's very much around you're getting in the door, but it's a revenue model that works on to some extent, a commission on sales, and then also packages that we sell, advertising and that kind of thing. So you've got this always on repeatable conversation. So it's more, I sort of look at it in a way of, it's more customer service, customer success that we're focused on here at youfurnish.com, because sustainability is what it's all about. Where with Lead Forensics, there was certainly an element of you're signing somebody up and then you're moving them down the chain to somebody else. So it's slightly different in terms of the approach on that side of things.
That's really interesting. And just for credibility's sake, here's a chance for you to show off. When you talk about building scalable B2B models, like what have you done? What have you seen? So when you started Lead Forensics to when you left, and what's happened at youfurnish.com so far?
No, very good question. So, Lead Forensics was a fascinating journey. So I was one of the early people into the business. So I joined in early 2012. The business had really started in earnest in 2011. And I was fortunate enough to have a personal sort of relationship with Paul Thomas, who was the co-founder of that business. And, at that point in time, very sort of minimal turnover, minimal clients. And the focus around the business was, well, we need to scale. We've got a unique product. For those people who don't know what Lead Forensics is, it's a B2B marketing tool. It basically tracks your website and tells you what businesses are coming on and what they're looking at. And you link that back into your marketing and sales activity to help you scale, which is how I met you, Owen, through that process. So for us, it was around creating market awareness and doing it en masse, and looking at how we actually scale that up to basically become a category leader in terms of what we did and sort of owning that space. And we took that business over the course of 6 years from minimal turnover, right about 500,000 in 2011 to 35 million turnover by the end of 2017 when I finished up with the business. And we had taken the business not just across the UK, but into Europe, into the US. We had set up multiple offices in the US. So it was a proper journey. And the thing that was fascinating about it was all fueled by our focus on the model and how we stuck that model and scaled it and brought more people in to help accelerate the model. Slightly different in the case of youfurnish.com in terms of, what we do at youfurnish.com just doesn't exist in market. It just hasn't existed in this space. So very much trying to create the category in the same way as Lead Forensics, but actually getting out there to the furniture retailers to sell the value proposition was a really different sort of sell. And it wasn't like you could go to a furniture retailer and say, hey, this is who we are, this is what we do, sign up now. It was very much this is where we're going, this is the direction of travel, this is how we're looking to innovate the furniture market, and these are your reasons to believe in what we're doing and how this is going to add value to your business, not right now, but in a year's time, 2 years' time, 3 years' time. So we've had a really successful journey so far. So we started on the journey of building the business in 2018. We didn't launch our first version of our website until 2019. And fortunately, through that process, we've managed to engage with some amazing retailers and partner with them. So we're now up to 129 retailers on the youfurnish.com platform, featuring brands like John Lewis, Made.com, Dunelm, Wayfair, really well-known brands that people would know, right down to smaller high street retailers who are, companies that you wouldn't have heard of, but they're now trying to move online. So for us, it's around understanding the shape of the market and the proposition, and also what value we can bring to businesses, because it's different to John Lewis than it is to the high street retailer. So, how we nail that model is an important part of how we grow as well.
Yeah, interesting. All right, incredible. That's fine. Let's go. Let's try and get some knowledge out of your brain. So starting right at the beginning, building repeatable, scalable B2B models of revenue growth. Where do you start?
Vision, 100%. So, and when I say vision, so everything for me is about aligning to a company vision of, who do you want to be and where do you want to go, right? And ultimately, if you think about sales, right, sales is actually selling your vision. And you can't actually go and sell that vision, or you can't have people join your team who can sell the vision if they don't actually believe in it themselves. So I think it actually starts with vision, Owen, around, okay, what do we stand for and what are we trying to achieve? So painting that picture is important. And then when you step back from that, you then say, okay, great. So now we've got this vision. Well, who might it be that might be interested in this vision? Like, where does it add value? And how do we need to approach those particular individuals and those businesses in that sort of sense. So if I take, lead forensics, for example, we knew in the very early days that we were a new proposition in market. We knew that companies, that B2B companies, had websites and they were actively promoting themselves on those websites. We also knew that they were running marketing activity to try and target businesses. So what we said was, let's have a look at where our proposition sort of fits within market, and let's tailor a message around those people to say, this is who we are, this is what you're doing, and this is how we can add value. Now, what we also knew was that we had to generate revenues. Now, I think this is where the vision point is really important. So we knew we had to generate revenues, and we knew that enterprise level businesses would have long sales cycles, which would mean that we had to invest a lot of money up front to break down the door with those guys with no potential outcome at the end, right? I think we've all been there in enterprise sales where you spend a lot of time, spinning the plates and you don't potentially get outcomes. So we had to look at it from a different perspective of how do we generate revenue right now and how do we do it quickly? Well, let's target the SMEs. So the SMEs want to grow sales. Maybe they're not as proficient when it comes to, the way that they market and that kind of thing. And maybe our price point would fit in within that where we can add value to what they do. So let's profile those SMEs. Let's look at the challenges that they potentially have across different industries and what their sales cycles look like. Let's define what our message is, and let's go at them with a hyper-personalized approach around how we can add value and sort of add into that things that they're already doing as a business. And then let's just go and acquire the data that allows us to do that en masse, right? So I know it's something that you're really proficient in. So that's literally the way that we sort of focused on it to start with, Owen. And then what we started to do within that, when it comes to repeatable, scalable models, is we developed our scripts and our approach to it, which most businesses do. But then we actually had to look at the data over the course of time to get to a point of statistical significance to say, are there particular types of businesses that are actually stickier with our proposition than others? So are there particular industries that maybe in B2B are a little more aggressive in the way that they actually sell? So I'll give you a classic example, right? And this is going to sound a little bit abstract, but there were a lot of recruitment agencies out there who had huge appetite for sales and people on the phones and that kind of thing. So lead forensics stuck super well with those guys because they were like, I need more companies posting jobs with me. I've got to pull the candidates over here. I'm spinning plates on both sides. So for us, like recruitment agents was an easy picking industry. Sorry to the recruitment agents that are being prospected by lead forensics at the moment, but it was easy pickings, and they were relatively cash rich as well. So they had money to spend and they had a desire. So that was always a really good market for us, and the data showed that over time that people that prospected that market got great returns. Landscape gardeners, commercial landscape gardeners, on the other hand, not so successful. And the reason being is they're typically at the coalface of working with the customer and they work on recommends, right? So, I felt sorry for the sales guys who had to prospect the landscape gardening industry because they had no appetite for marketing and sales. They had websites, but they were never going to jump on the phone and try and prospect someone, and it just wouldn't fit. So coming back to the start of sort of, how you go about the process, you've got your vision, and then you've got your approach, and then you've got your market segments or your data, your verticals. And then what you're doing is you're saying, okay, let's make sure our approach is tailored to the verticals, but let's run it for a period of time. Let's measure the way that our salespeople are pitching it, and let's look at what the data actually tells us in terms of outcomes. And then with the outcomes, you just start to play the statistical significance game of this one's accelerating faster than here. Our objective is that we want to try and generate cash within the business. So let's focus on those verticals that we're getting more success from. And that's how we did it in a really quick synopsis.
Love it. I've got so many questions, but I'm going to start with a really, really simple one.
Fire away. Yeah.
Which is, what does a vision mean to you? Because I think that's a word that gets bandied around. You need a vision. How do you start? If you've never had a vision before, you've never written a vision down, you've never had to communicate it to people that aren't part of building that before, what elements are there to a vision?
Yeah, that's a great question. To put it really simply, a vision is something that people can understand and align behind. And the more complex it is, the less alignment you're going to get. It's as simple as that. So if I take the example of what we've done with YouFurnish.com, our vision is to be the world's largest search and discovery website for home furniture and furnishings, right? Yeah. It's really, really simple, and then people that come to our business and see it, or people that join the business, they understand it straight away. They're like, that's crystal clear. That's our direction of travel. That's where we're going. So we deliberately tried to simplify it within the process so that people would go, awesome, so I'm part of this, and I get it, like I get what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
Whereas you see some companies that say, we want to be the most innovative business in the tech space, developing solutions for companies across the world. And it's like, well, what the bloody hell does that mean? Like, what does innovation mean? Like,
Yeah.
what do you mean by that? What solutions are you developing and for who and why, And so it's really hard. Like, if you're a sales guy, particularly if you're a junior sales exec and you're coming into a business and your manager or the CEO of that business says, this is what we want to be, well, how do you develop a pitch around that? What do you call someone up and go, we're the most innovative software development company in the world and we're going to revolutionize your business? And then you get the so what factor. I don't even know what you're talking about right now. So what? So for me, vision is just a very, very simple sentence that structures who you are and just people can align behind it, and it gives you a direction to travel.
Yeah. I'm really interested to get, thank you, by the way, that's really useful. I'm really interested to dig in on your phrase that you talk about, hyper personalized. So we talk a lot about relevancy. So relevancy of message to sector or message to stage of business or whatever it might be. What are the kinds of things that you looked at? So we've heard you talk about industry. So you looked at a specific message for an industry. What are the other aspects that you looked at when it came to personalization?
It's a good question. It depends on how deep you want to go. But I think, so for me, like, I think business works most successfully when you can actually personalize down to somebody's own personal level, right? So effectively, businesses have a mission and they have goals and objectives. And in sales, in B2B sales, you're trying to tap into what those things are. But actually, what I'm always trying to work at is what's the individual that you're speaking to, or the individuals, what's motivating them, what's driving them, what are they actually trying to achieve within the process as well. So when I talk about hyper-personalization, the way that we approached it at the Forensics and the way we approach it at youfurnish.com as well is understanding that business in depth before we even make the approach, right? To a certain extent, you're trying to break down the door, so you don't want to do too much. But certainly if you break down the door and you book an appointment with someone, we'll do everything from read, any detail about that business, anything that's in the public eye, things they've shared, things they've posted, press releases, if it's a publicly listed company, anything they've published around their direction of travel, things that they're looking to hit within the next 12 months, and really pulling out the key points from that and trying to personalize it back to the people that you're approaching so that you say to them, I know your journey, I understand your journey, and I want to help you on that journey as well. I can add value and I want to help you on it. Now, there are multiple steps to it, Owen. So there's your first approach to open up the door, and then you bring it back to, okay, once you speak to someone, you go the old 2 ears, 1 mouth scenario of ask pertinent questions, let them respond and take everything in. And the things that people respond with actually will give you the answers to how you can win a deal, right? And when I talk about hyper-personalization, it's not just how you open up the opportunity, but it's about how you learn from them as to what those things are that they need to achieve, and then how you actually position back off the back of it. And if you can make an approach to someone that, that shows that you have empathy for the challenges they're going through, and that you have a solution that will help fit those challenges and help them sort of move forward, and that actually by partnering with you, the objective of what they're trying to achieve can be achieved on their side, it's actually not that hard when you get to that point. But it's all about learning along the way, and that's the general approach that I've always taken.
So let's talk about that learning, because you've touched a number of times on data and the data informing decision making along the way, even as simplistic as industry. So let's not target that industry because it just doesn't work, or they don't convert, they're not engaged, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
How long do you need to do something before you believe in that data and before it triggers a decision to say that's something we should stop doing or do more of?
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting question. It depends on your industry. It depends on what you're doing. So if I give an example using lead forensics, so we had a really, really powerful direct model to businesses, right? So that worked really, really well for us. And my role in my division within lead forensics was focused on partnerships and that kind of thing. And that was also working really well, where we would work with partners that take us into their clients, and we would help build a proposition around that. So that worked really well. But then we tried to go in a couple of different directions with partnerships, where we tried to do more corporate partnerships where we felt like there were value-added alignments. So partnering with associations, for example, so like chambers of commerce, those sorts of things. And the thing that became challenging for us within that, Owen, was that, the context was lost. The context probably wasn't there in the first place with those partnerships, So we were doing it because we're like, okay, this will give us access to a lot of businesses and we think we can add value to these associations. But the associations didn't necessarily see it that way, because they were like, we want to have brands on board who we can take to our members, but our members maybe don't have the context around why we're actually partnering with this business and that kind of thing. And what we found was that it just wasn't a great avenue for us to go down. So we ended up spending a lot of time trying to prove it out, but it didn't necessarily work. But we had to give it time as well to prove it, because it could have been super successful. We could have opened up the door and found tons of opportunity and developed that out. So, we gave that at least 12 months to try and prove itself, and we needed multiple relationships, because you couldn't just look at one isolated case and say, well, that actually is what's going to happen across the rest. So we actually needed like 5, 6, 7 different relationships in place, and we needed to look at the learnings across the board with all those relationships. So for our industry, I would say it was 12 months of learning. For some businesses, they don't have the luxury of that time. And what I would say on that side of things as well is bringing it back to your own vision and your goals and objectives is you have to make those decisions based on what's your event horizon. So for instance, at youfurnish.com, we probably don't have that kind of event horizon because we're fast scaling and we need to keep uber focused. So we don't have time to sort of play around on the periphery, trying to develop things over here that may or may not work out. So I think for any business, I would say if you calibrate that back to, okay, what time frame do we have? If we time box it, what are we prepared to put into it? How much money are we prepared to spend on it? How much resource? And then that might start to give you your answers around it. But for me, a statistically significant test probably needs to run a 12-month journey to get some kind of outcomes and learnings from it.
Brilliant. Thank you. That's really good. Let's just talk for a second about some of the things that you have tried and failed with, because you've touched on one there, and some of the things that you've done both at Leap Forensics and then at YouFurnish as well. And you just know that if you want to build a repeatable, scalable B2B model, that's got to be in your mix. Just touch on some of those for us.
There are a lot. So this is going to sound a little bit random, but the first thing is when you are leading in sales, when you're leading, what you'll get, and you typically get this because most salespeople are quite bullish and they don't have a lot of self-belief, or there's a lot of front to the way they go about it, because you need to have that about you when you go into sales. So maybe a better way of framing this, there's not a huge amount of humility, as we probably know, right? But that's what you want from salespeople. You want people who are out there and they're go-getters and that kind of thing. But the flip side of that you get from salespeople is that they always know best. So as a leader, you'll have salespeople tell you over and over, no, I do it this way, and this is what works, and that kind of thing. Now, the interesting part and the point of calibration on it is you have a model, right? And you have a proven model, all right? So once you've gone through that process and you know what works, right? But you've got salespeople that want to operate outside the box. And the thing that I found that doesn't work successfully is when someone comes to you and says, I think I've got a better way and I'm going to operate in this sort of sense. Now, I'm always prepared to give people a go, but what I find is if you give people too much rope, they typically tend to hang themselves. So on that side of things, I would say, allow salespeople to be creative, but don't let them just go and run their own show, because then you end up getting 5 or 6 different processes. And the challenge that you have behind it is, one, it typically doesn't yield results. That's the first thing I can say over my career time and time again, is it doesn't. And the other thing is it makes it a really hard process to manage, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to benchmark people, based on outcomes and performance in a process. And if you've got, let's say you've got 5 salespeople and they're all operating to a slightly different process, how can you benchmark them? Apart from, final outcomes, but how can you benchmark them to know what's good, what's not? How can you set clear examples for people around, what they should be doing and how they should be practicing? Because you can't point to any one particular example of what, with any statistical significance, of what actually works effectively. So my first sort of answer to that question is, have your process and don't allow people to really operate outside of the process, And the people that believe in what you're doing from a sales perspective will operate inside the process, because they'll believe in the end outcomes and what's best for them as well. So That's the first sort of piece.
Love that.
The second piece behind it probably comes down to, how quickly are you prepared to test and learn? So, it probably contradicts a little bit what I'm talking about with process there, but where I've seen businesses go wrong, and I worked for a large multinational company before I joined Lead Forensics, and where those guys were going wrong was that they really weren't prepared to learn, right, on the journey. So they really they had a way of operating which was determined by the US, and everything that the Americans said had to be done, right? But they're not operating in the UK market.
Yeah.
So so you would go into these client engagements and it would be like, so this is the way that we do this in the States. And it's like, so you're a company that's based in the Midwest of the US and your target market is American businesses, but yet we're operating here in the UK and you think that that's going to work, and it's just not the way that it is. And I think their inability to adapt and say, okay, why don't we do a little bit of test and learn here in the UK? Why don't we look at, maybe some ideas, some approaches? Why don't we listen to the leaders that are on the ground there in the UK that we've appointed, and then take a direction of travel based on the outcomes that they're actually getting, And I think, where companies can fall over is if you don't have some kind of bandwidth or tolerance for test and learn, then you probably won't progress. You'll get to a certain point, but you'll probably reach a ceiling. So that's probably another learning for me as well. Hence, I come back to the association play with Lead Forensics. Look, with all best intentions, we put a lot of effort into it, a lot of energy, and we got to the end of the 12-month cycle and we went, that's not going to work for us. But what we did learn was there were some facets of it that did work, and we continued those on within the business, but we actually stopped the program on association partnerships. And, it was a worthwhile exercise, albeit it didn't give us the results that we wanted.
Yeah. So along that way, let's just look at that for a second. Along that 12-month period, there must have been times, it wasn't like it got to 12 months and you went, oh, let's review it. And no, it doesn't work. I guess you're looking along the way. Were there times where you were tempted to say, my instinct is telling me this isn't working and we should pull earlier? And what made you go past those points?
Yeah. There were, there definitely were. I mean, it was always, for me, data and numbers and outcomes probably tell the story. Like emotions and opinions, people try and override tangible data with emotions and opinions a lot, right? And that's just not a sustainable way of working, right? And people say, oh, I make decisions based on my gut. It's like, at times you can, but actually what people probably miss in that process, Owen, is that gut decision has come from some source of data, right? So, and you're just fooling yourself if you think that it's not, right? So there's that bit. So the data always at Lead Forensics, and the same here at youfurnish.com, always informs our decisions. So, we would constantly look at the data, like every single week, every single month. We'd be looking at opportunities generated. We'd be looking at the industries that those opportunities were generated in for patents. We'd be looking at conversion rates to sale, average order values. Like, we would really dig into the data to get clear understandings and learnings. And then that would help you frame your model, right? And certainly, I remember with the association play again, I know I keep using this as an example, but we were 6 months in and we were probably 3 or 4 associations in as well. And I could see that it was struggling. I could see it was fledgling and it probably wasn't going to get there. And because I was at the cold face of it as well, doing a lot of the engagements, I could just see that the appetite probably wasn't there as well on the association side to get it over the line, or it needed a substantial boost and it probably wasn't going to get there. But there were some upcoming opportunities that looked like it might get us there. So the thing that sort of kept me on the hook in particular was, but maybe I just haven't quite hit it. I know the numbers are telling me this, but maybe this next engagement here is going to be the thing that tips us over the edge, right? And so fortune sort of favors the brave a little bit to a certain extent. But then you went into the next engagement and then the cycle repeated again, and all you had to do was refer back to the data for your answer. And there was one particular moment I remember back in early 2015, and I was going up to Leeds for an association event, and I was driving up after work in the office down in Portsmouth, by the way. And it was snowing down. It was absolutely snowing down. It was about 7 o'clock, and I'm driving up the M1, and I just knew. We were 6.5 months in, and I was like, this is going to be the biggest waste of my time going to this event. And it was. I got to the event, and it just wasn't what I expected it to be, and that kind of thing. but I knew it on the way up there. And it was probably at that point in time, I was like, I need to start making a change here, because the numbers are telling me this, and I don't really fancy driving up the M1 in the snow at 7 o'clock on a Monday night. So there are some key triggers along the way that tell you what the right answer is.
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? Because, you know, fortune favors the brave, all that kind of stuff. I've got that image of the guy that's digging in the ground and that's a foot away from gold and stops digging and gives up, you know, all those sorts of things, and you just don't know. Exactly. Which is why I think you talking about the consistency approach and making sure that you've got tangible measurables in there, and the data behind it informing decisions is so important.
Yeah.
How do you decide when you're doing something new like that, whether that be a completely new business that you need to build a repeatable, scalable model, a sales model with, or a new offering or new department or going into a new market? How do you decide what should inform the decision around how fast you go? Because of course I can go and hire 10 people tomorrow, take the cost of that, go hard, find out really quickly. I can do it gradually. And I guess one's right sometimes and one's right the other. Is that informed by the vision and where you want to go, or are there other elements that play a part of making that decision?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. There are multiple. There are two. I've actually got two answers for you that contradict themselves, because it's very different in youfurnish.com to what it is in Lead Forensics. And I think it sort of comes down to the way you force the pace in market. So at Lead Forensics, everything that we did was based around the model, right? So we knew that a salesperson needed to generate X amount of appointments, and then within that, they should have been, closing X amount of appointments. The average order value would typically be this, and then the outcomes would be Y. And so, when you're looking at that as a front-end sales model, you go, okay, that's what needs to actually happen as an output. So anything we do outside of that, we always need to calibrate it back to that direct sales model. And then what we would do is we would look at our different channels. We'd look at marketing, direct sales, partnerships, and then we'd look at performance and those key metrics that sit within it. So on that side of things, we worked on a real, what's the revenue and profit generated per head. And then when we got to a particular point, so for example, with my team, it was me. And then I was profitable enough to be able to bring someone else in. And then when I was at that point and I could carry them for a few months to bring them up to speed, brought them in. And then once that person was trained up and then they were generating profit, I could have another one and another one. And I got to about 17 in the end in that sort of team that I was running. So, it was all around what does the model actually look like and when does it enable me to open up another head? Yeah. So my ability to move was actually based on profitability.
Yeah.
Flip that a little bit with youfurnish.com because there's so much demand to come onto our platform. So we have two of us in the partnership development team now, and looking to sort of move that to 3 pretty shortly. And it's more for us at the moment. It's more a case of trying to keep up with demand to come onto the platform. So we're getting a lot of inquiries from retailers across the market who want to be involved. And like I say, our model is around sustainability. So we don't just onboard a retailer and we're hoping they'll be here in a month's time. We're thinking about what does that relationship look like in 3 months. And there's the ability to, leverage packages and stuff into them as you go. So actually, what we couldn't afford to do on this side of things is turn people down and say, oh, okay, look, we love what your brand does. We love your products, all that kind of stuff. But unfortunately, I just don't have the time to have a conversation with you. And because I don't, I'm going to turn you down, right? And then they're like, oh, okay, that's a bit weird. So for us, we've actually front-ended hiring to bring people in to keep up with those engagements, to keep up with the demand, knowing that there's a longer-term play around where we're trying to go. So they're two actually quite distinct models between the two different businesses, but it's all based around financially how you capitalize, I guess, and then also, how fast do you want to scale as well, or what is the end outcome or objective you're trying to reach?
What I'm taking from that is that it comes down to the plan and having a plan against it. I think what we see is too many businesses do something because they think it might fix their problems rather than have a strategy behind it and then not give it long enough to fix the problem and all those sorts of things that make it very difficult to measure.
Well, it's a really good point. And I think particularly in, businesses that are young and sort of immature and stuff, there always is an appetite to go and overhire, so people get busy and they go, well, we just need people. And it's the wrong sort of approach to it. So the way, and I really did sort of learn this strongly through Lead Forensics, was you don't just hire for the sake of hiring, you hire with specific outcomes in mind, and you always need to look at your cash burn position as well. So, when you look at the way you capitalized, you're like, okay, well, if I make this strategic bet, what is my, where might I be in 6 months' time? So
Yeah.
what outcomes do I need to get from this? And is it worthwhile making that bet as well? So I think that's a really important part. And the discipline that I learned at Lead Forensics around, we weren't capitalized to the extent of we're raising £50 million. It was, you generate profit within the business and revenue, and you can grow that team, and that's how we're going to grow. So it makes you think long and hard about the value that hire can add and how you sort of scale. And then you know what your boundaries are within it as well. Yeah. And what I see with a lot of businesses is they just throw money at the wall. Like they raise money, they come into this capital, and then they're like, right, we need 5 heads here, but 5 heads with no objective, no direction of travel, no model. And then you've got people working in disparate ways that you can't control, and you end up burning cash. So there's a whole piece around, just knowing what that actually looks like for you and trying to work around how your business should operate.
Brilliant. I want to talk about people with you. So you've touched on people and people staying, going outside the box from a sales perspective. As you've grown out revenue teams, what are the key things that you're looking at when it comes to the people that you want? So you said you're looking for somebody else in the partnership team at ufurnish.com at some point soon. What are going to be your priorities there?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. So look, there's one thing that I've always held true in business over my career, and I've learned it from some amazing people that I've been fortunate enough to work with, and that is that people need to have integrity, and that you can never get integrity back. So the first thing I'm actually looking for within individuals is, how much integrity do they have? So how transparent are they about who they are and what they do and the way they approach their work and that kind of thing. So, I think, integrity, honesty, these sorts of things, like these are the things that you hold true in people. Because if you've got someone within your business who has a really high level of integrity and is very honest about how they approach things and feels like they can share things with you and that they're approachable, then I think you're already in a good space with that person, because people can learn things over time.
Yeah.
But I think and sales is a particularly bad industry for it, I think where sales can fall over sometimes is that you just find salespeople that have no integrity, and companies make decisions based on, can we get short-term outcomes from someone that looks like they're really, really good, but actually that person's going to sell their mum and their cat and everything that goes with it to get the result. And what it does is it creates a toxic environment within your business, because you didn't get the fundamentals of people with integrity working together as a team. So that's the first thing I always look for, Owen, within the process. And then you break it down into, technical aptitude, experience. You always factor in, okay, where have they been on their previous journeys and what can we leverage within the business? There are multiple sort of moving parts, but at the core, it's that integrity piece for me that's absolutely critical.
Do you know, I love that. I think that's absolutely awesome. That's the best answer I've heard to that question in forever, because I think what we typically hear is we're looking for personality, culture fit, we're looking for proven expertise, a degree, all these sorts of things. But I love the fact that you started and finished with integrity there. I think that's a brilliant answer.
If I just touch on that as well. So it's interesting where you look at that criteria. I mean, I remember when I moved to the UK and the first job that I landed, they were really interested in my degree. And tell us about your degree and that kind of thing. And I was like, my degree doesn't define me. I went to university. I was 19. I didn't have a bloody clue what I was going to do, right? And I was interested in business, so I studied entrepreneurship, and I was in there. But I was more interested in playing football, and I was 19. But I was like, I want to be a professional footballer, so I'm going to focus that. And uni is going to be a side hustle for me because it's going to give me something as an outcome. Now, in later life, I do look at the virtues of what university brought, and it's great, but it's like 5% of my learning and development, and everything has come through my career experience. And the most successful people I've ever worked with, none of them have degrees. They went straight into business. They cut their teeth by learning and developing and asking questions and being curious and challenging themselves. And having a degree doesn't, in some industries it works. I wouldn't want a doctor, for example, coming to like Nick Riviera or Simpsons or something, faux degree on the wall. But, I certainly don't know if that adds, particularly in sales, I don't know if that adds any value. But to your point, like the integrity piece just down there is it overrides everything else for me.
Yeah. Be kinder on yourself, though. You don't need to describe yourself as in later life just yet. I think you're all right. You're not quite there. Quick question: as an Aussie saying football, what kind of football do we need? Because that could be 3 different sports.
Australian rules football. I mean, the only kind, the real stuff.
The one where you get points for hitting the post, you mean?
Exactly. Yeah. And so you should as well. Like, you know, it's encouragement to keep going, like keep having a go.
Love that attitude. Absolutely brilliant. Okay, let's wrap up. Anything else that you can think of that people could find value, whether it's a lesson that went, you know, from something that went wrong, or something else that we've not talked about, where you look at repeatable, scalable B2B revenue models and growing it out? Anything else that you can add?
Yeah, so there are probably a couple of bits, and it probably comes down to there are two things, I think, and it's empowerment and belief, and that's in your people. So I think there are some definite things that I've learned along the way that I think are critical. You need to be able to empower people, so you need to be able to give them responsibility in a direction of travel, but let them go and let them learn and let them make mistakes, and you've got to believe in them. Now, if you don't empower people and you micromanage people, you won't get great outcomes from it, right? That's the first thing, right? So people need to feel empowered, but you need to give them the direction and you need to believe in them. And the minute you don't believe in someone, they shouldn't be there because it's not right for them and it's not right for you. So I think those are really critical sort of factors. And the other piece, and this is a humility piece for leaders in business, is for some reason we work in like a hierarchical society where people think that I carry a title, so I'm a person of significant importance and people work for me. And the way I've always viewed it is, you know, as a leader, you work for the people that actually work for you. You know, your job is to support and enable people to be the best they can be, to help them achieve. And the minute you start playing power games with people, you'll lose them, right? You need to support them, to give them the advice, to give them the guidance, to give them the steering, the steer that they need. And a great quote I heard recently, I was listening to a podcast with Harry Redknapp. It might sound a little bit random, the old wheeler dealer from the South Coast. But he said one thing about his time managing in football, and that was that he never was a manager who used to yell and berate people for, you know, things that they got wrong. He was always the guy who would put his arm around people and encourage them, and like, what, you know, where do you think it went wrong, and how do you think we got on, and what do you think we could do, and that kind of thing. Yeah. He was that kind of guy. And he talked about that being the driver for his success, because people felt like they could lean on his energy and he would give that back to them. So I think that, you know, for me, like, leadership is very much about that. And it comes down to empowering people, believing in them, and working to help harness their ability, and you'll get better outcomes. So I think that's a big learning across my career that I try and sort of fold into what we do.
That's awesome. Ray, can I just say, I think you're an absolute inspiration. I think you've brought so many intelligent, well thought through points today that clearly show that your experience is so rich, and that you've got things right, you've got things wrong, you've been prepared to self-analyze and to learn from it. And I'm sure that people watching and listening to this will agree that I've learned a lot today, and that no doubt they have as well. So thank you for ever so much for contributing today. If people want to get in touch with you, or if they want to go and buy some furniture, what should they do? Where should they go?
Well, if they want to buy furniture, the only place they should go to is youfurnish.com.
I thought you'd say that.
So that's the first thing. And if people want to get in touch, and, you know, I'm always up for talking with colleagues across the industry and sharing ideas and that kind of thing, people can reach me on ray@youfurnish.com. So you feel free to drop me an email or connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'm more than happy to keep the conversation going.
Amazing. Ray, you're an absolute legend. Thank you for giving us all of that intelligence and experience out of your brain today, and giving us the time. Really genuinely enjoyed talking with you. Thank you.
That's amazing. Thanks, Owen. I really appreciate it as well. And you are also a legend in my estimation.
Thank you. Very kind of you. Very kind of you. I'll speak to you soon.
Good man. Thanks, Owen. Cheers. Bye-bye.